Today we are getting started on topic 11, Women and Poetry in the Tang Dynasty. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest host, Dr. Samei. The title of her first episode is Writing Women from Inner Quarters to the Halls of Power. Shangguan Wan'er. Let us warmly welcome Dr. Samei.
Welcome to the first of 3 episodes on women and poetry during China's Tang Dynasty. In this episode, I will set the stage a bit for our discussion by talking about the problematic position of women who wrote poetry in the Tang in the context of 2 things. First, the social nature of poetry writing in the society of the time in general, and second, a renewed interest in the ritual regulation of women in the Tang, which mitigated against the relatively open and cosmopolitan society of the time and was leading toward increasing seclusion of women, particularly women of high-class families. Against this background, I will go on to discuss a set of poems by a woman of the early Tang, Shangguan Wan'er, who served as secretary to the Empress Wu Zetian during a time of unprecedented female power and influence in the imperial court. But first, again, to set the stage, why would writing poetry have been a problematic activity for women in the Tang? Well, let's first consider that writing poetry was a shared social activity during this period. Many of the poems that have survived from the Tang and the surrounding dynasties were composed to mark an occasion in response to other poems as part of correspondence or in social gatherings that often included assigned topics, contests, and so forth. Writing happened not in a room of one's own, but in the rooms of others and for others and with others. In this sense, it was more a public than a private activity. And this presented a challenge for women's literary expression due to the expectation that respectable women be secluded from the broader society. By the Tang, women's seclusion was becoming the mark of respectable high-class society. Because poetry in the Chinese tradition was an expression of one's intent, through which one made oneself known to others, the writing woman, by exchanging or circulating her works, was in effect circulating herself, her emotions and thoughts, the interior self that should be revealed only to her husband and family. Women whose poems circulated widely could thus be viewed as morally suspect, like women who allowed their beauty to be viewed widely. So in this context, it shouldn't be surprising that many women poets whose works survived from this period were courtesan entertainers, ji, or Taoist nuns who often functioned as de facto courtesans. The ritual expectations governing women's behavior, and especially the separation of the sexes, were originally laid out in the pre-Qin classic, the Book of Rites. As I mentioned, during the Tang, there was a renewed interest in ritual propriety and the moral duties of women. The Han Dynasty text Lessons for Women, 女戒, dating from 106 of the Common Era, by the female historian Ban Zhao, was reprinted during the Tang, along with 3 other texts as part of the so-called Classics for Women. One of these texts, the Analects for Women, clearly restates the ritual requirement for female separation. And I'm quoting Patricia Ebree's translation here. Inner and outer each have their place. Males and females gather separately. Women do not peek through walls nor step into the outer courtyard. If they go out, they must cover their faces. If they look out, they conceal their forms. It's important to note that this seclusion or separation of women didn't usually amount to the total seclusion of women or their complete exclusion from public life. During this period, many women participated in commerce and exercised considerable authority in their households. We have records of Tang women attending public events such as temple gatherings and even polo tournaments. During the early Tang, women also attained unprecedented levels of political power, as we will see in a moment, although this has not been regarded positively by posterity. The requirement to maintain the boundary between public and private extended all the way to the imperial court. In the case of the emperor, the pull of private affections was particularly feared because of the potential of the family of the consort, the in-laws or wai-qi of the emperor, to exercise undue power and control over him. And Yang Guifei is a well-known example of this in Chinese history. In fact, this is exactly what happens in the case of Empress Wu, or Wu Zhao, better known as Wu Zetian. Wu Zhao started as a palace woman, a concubine to Emperor Taizong, then became the consort of his son, Emperor Gaozong. But her power eventually grew so great that she became Gaozong's regent and then continued as regent through the reigns of his two sons. Finally, in 690, she became empress in her own right, even taking to herself the title Emperor, Huangdi, and declaring her own dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, during the 15 or so years that she reigned in her own right. Empress Wu is infamous for her ruthlessness. The story goes that when she married Emperor Gaozong, she captured his first empress and his consort, held them without food until they were nearly starving, then flogged them, cut off their hands and feet, and had them thrown into wine vats. After they had marinated in the wine vats for a while, she finally had them beheaded. Although her reign came to be viewed by posterity in the kind of negative light in which other female so-called pretenders to power have been seen, Wu Zetian is also remembered as an able ruler, so much that despite her excesses after her death, she was given the title Zetian, meaning models herself on heaven. She's especially known for her expansion of the civil service examination system. Her patronage of literary figures and her inclusion of poetry in the civil service exams would have lasting significance for the elevation of poetry during the Tang. During her years in power, Wu Zetian was also an important patroness of projects of Confucian and Buddhist scholarship. Wu Zetian was also an important patroness of Shangguan Wan'er, whose poems we will discuss today. Shangguan Wan'er was a remarkable palace woman who became an arbiter of the poetic ability of others, as well as a ghostwriter for both Empress Wu and her son and successor, Emperor Zhongzong. In this sense, Wu Zetian's reign marks an unprecedented period of female power in literary as well as political life. Shangguan Wan'er was no stranger to Wu Zetian's ruthlessness. Both her father and her grandfather were executed for plotting against the empress. Along with other women of her household, the infant Shangguan Wan'er was raised as a slave in the inner palace. As she grew up, her talent quickly became apparent, and she soon became indispensable to the empress, who appointed her as her secretary. Following Empress Wu's death, she continued to serve at court through the reign of Emperor Zhongzong, becoming his consort. And incidentally, female influence continued to dominate the court under Zhongzong in the person of Zhongzong's Empress Wei and her two daughters. At some point during her service at court, Shangguan offended Empress Wu in some manner, but rather than suffer her to be executed, the empress had her tattooed on the face. Tattooing was a common means of branding someone a criminal for life. She returned to favor and became extremely influential in Empress Wu's court, so that from 696 to 709, she wrote most of Empress Wu's and her son Emperor Zhongzong's state documents and made important military and civil decisions on the empress's behalf. Indeed, it's thought that many of the works of both Empress Wu and Zhongzong came from Shangguan's pen. Listen to how she is described in a preface to a posthumous collection of her works. And the excerpts from this preface are from Ron Egan's translation. She was exceptional in virtue and the most talented member of her generation. Her perceptive insight and listening enabled her to probe the mysteries of the world and to reflect its underlying principles. When she opened a scroll, she absorbed everything in it like the ocean, as if she had heard it all before. And when she wrote, her brush moved like flying clouds, as if her reasoning had been organized in advance. In addition to serving as Empress Wu's secretary, she was also made to serve as judge of poetry competitions. The following anecdote from the Tang Shi Shi, a Song Dynasty collection of stories related to Tang poets and poetry, describes one such instance. And I'm reading from Edelman Grant's translation here. On the last day of the first month, Emperor Zhongzong visited the Kunming Pond. When it came time to write verse, the officials composed more than 100 poems on imperial command. A platform was set up in front of the imperial tent, and Shangguan Wan'er was ordered to select one of the poems to be the text for a melody the emperor had recently composed. The source of Shangguan's power seems to have been primarily intellectual as opposed to sexual, so that even Empress Wu does not perceive her as a threat to her own power. Perhaps because of the tattoo that marred her face, Shangguan was able to enjoy unprecedented influence without suffering the suspicion and reproach usually reserved for so-called kingdom-toppling beauties. Still, in her later years, when she became consort to Emperor Zhongzong, she would be known for her affairs and favoritism. Let's look now at a couple of Shangguan Wan'er's best-regarded poems. These two poems are part of a series of 25 written in 710, not long before her execution, on her visit with Emperor Zhongzong to the residence of Princess Changning, his daughter by a concubine. Here's Visiting Princess Changning's Pool, number 17. Cliffs and gorges to climb to heart's content, delighting the eye while also rejoicing the heart. The wind in bamboo is like a transverse flute. Flowing waters stand in for the music of lutes. This series of poems presents Shangguan's direct encounters with nature as she visits Princess Changning's estate. In the first half of this example, we see the speaker's sensuous and emotional response to an outing in rugged surroundings, suggested by the presence of cliffs and gorges. The scenery both delights the eyes with its beauty and rejoices the heart. It brings joy to the inner heart or the mind by way of its sublime power. In the second half of the poem, natural sounds are compared to the music of a social or court gathering. The wind in bamboo is like a transverse flute. Flowing waters stand in for the music of lutes. These lines suggest that the poet finds a satisfaction and joy in nature that rivals or surpasses her pleasure in the entertainments she enjoys at the imperial court. Let's stay with Shangguan's enjoyment of nature here for a moment. During this and earlier periods, depictions of women in poetry often show them surrounded by highly ornamented interior scenes that reflect their beauty or their class. There may perhaps be some reference to an exterior element that becomes imbued with a woman's emotional state, like the fallen blossoms of spring or rain dripping on the trees. Shangguan's poem, in contrast, places her in a direct encounter with nature out of doors. While it's true that the scenery she's interacting with here may be the elaborately constructed private estate of the princess, still, Shangguan does not refer to any artificial or designed elements. The estate is just outside the capital, but the encounter with nature described in the poem could just as easily be taking place far distant from it. In another poem from the same series, Shangguan makes her companionship with nature more explicit. Listen now to the fifth poem of the series. Visiting Princess Changning's Pool, number 5. Limbs and branches, lush and luxuriant, refinement and nature in elegant balance. The woods and the hills are my companions, the pine and the cassia, my neighbors. The line refinement and nature in elegant balance is a quote from the Analects of Confucius, and by its reference to the combination of nature and artifice, here does draw attention to the element of artful construction of the princess's estate, in contrast to how nature appeared in the previous example. Yet the two last lines again place the poet in direct encounter with nature, where the woods and hills are her companions and the trees her neighbors. The notion of friendship with nature harkens back to the warm and rustic relationship with nature that we see in the Jin Dynasty poet Tao Qian, It also prefigures the unity with nature that later High Tang poets such as Wang Wei would inscribe in their poetry, reflecting their encounters with nature on their estates. The High Tang is the designation given to the reign of Xuanzong that followed Zhongzong's reign and is considered the golden age of Chinese poetry. High Tang poets, as Stephen Owen has described, would often attempt to portray the sense of being a recluse in their poems, despite the fact that in real life, their natural excursions were mostly limited to their estates or the estates of others on the outskirts of the city. In this sense, Shangguan here is at the cutting edge of a literary trend that would become the hallmark of the High Tang. Eventually, after the death of Emperor Zhongzong, Shangguan was beheaded. Her tomb was discovered fairly recently, in 2013, and it was in a state that suggests it may have been destroyed in an organized or official fashion, and her intact remains were not found. Shangguan Wan'er is one of the most influential women ever to have served at court, apart perhaps from Wu Zetian herself. In popular history, she's sometimes known as China's first woman prime minister. Today, she's the subject of TV shows and even appears as a video game character. Few among the thousands of palace women exercised anywhere near her level of power and influence, whether in affairs of state or cultural or literary life. Perhaps because she happened to live during an unusual period of female dominance at court, her influence was allowed to enter spheres traditionally reserved for men alone. Most of the female poets whose works survive from this period didn't reside so close to power, to say nothing of proximity to such female power as that held by Empress Wu. They were mostly nuns and courtesans whose livelihoods depended greatly upon the whims of their male patrons. Many of the anonymous poems that survive may have come from the pens of women courtesan entertainers. In the next episode, we'll look at the courtesan poet Xue Tao, widely regarded as one of the best women poets of the period. Thanks for joining me. All the best. Until next time.
Let us thank Dr. Samei for such a stimulating talk. We look forward to presenting her second episode on women and poetry in the Tang Dynasty next Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. Let us relax and listen to a reading of the poem in Mandarin by Zhao Wenxuan.
由长宁公主刘卑迟25首其17，上官婉儿。岩鹤自登临，荧幕复疑心。风黄泪长笛，流水当鸣情。由长宁公主刘卑迟25首其5，上官婉儿。枝条郁郁，文质彬彬。山林作伴，松桂为邻。